There was quite an arresting video, only 9 minutes long, from Sky News Australia, featuring Andrew Bolt, talking about the rot in our culture is making us dangerously weak. Of course, he refers to Western culture. It is an irresistible statement which I wish to explore with you.
Rot in our culture that's making us dangerously weak. Have a look at this guy standing behind the Chinese dictator. He is Wang Huning, rarely seen and then usually somewhere back in the shadows somewhere. Wang Huning is one of only 7 members of the Standing Committee of China's Politburo, the top ruling body. But it's the one person there who hasn't run a province or a big department, is there because he's the thinker. He's a genius. He was one of China's...
I must say that's what I think I am. If I'm ever, well, I might as well be boastful. Because that's, I suppose, the ultimate weakness. But that is really what I would like to be, this person advising a great nation, or not so great nation, about what is to be done in terms of national policy, both domestic and foreign. Let's carry on.
Youngest ever professors. And in his 30s, he got a scholarship to go work and study in America. And he wandered around the US and eventually wrote a book called America Against America. And if you want to understand why China thinks it could now win a war against America, this book will tell you. Now, Wang back then looked at America's drug problem, its race tensions, its gap between rich and poor, the weakening of even the family unit. And he said back then, this is going back 30 years, he saw a growing nihilism of Americans who are young, growing up very individualist and ignorant of traditional Western values. And he said, this is a crisis that will only get worse. America is falling apart. 30 years later, he's now on the Politburo, and it's actually hard to disagree because the same rot, well, you see it right here in Australia as well. I'll give you just 2 examples from just the past couple of days that Wang Huning would say, well, that suggests I'm right. 1, Melbourne University now wants to hire a gender affirmation officer, salary around $110,000 for a senior advisor that it says will be the first point of contact for members of the university community wishing to affirm their gender. Now, here you have a perfect example of the West's obsession now with ourselves, with how we identify by gender or sexual inclination or race, and how we now even expect the university to spend taxpayers' money to promote our tender self-image. Second example, which is related, Claire Coleman is a poet and author who's won a prize meant to help Aboriginal writers, and she says, well, colonisers, by which she means non-Aborigines, colonisers often ask me why I don't identify with my Irish and English ancestry instead, why I prefer to identify with my Aboriginal family. And her answer to that is, if you could identify with the bully or the victim, with the murderers or the family of the murderers, with the genocidal colonisers or the colonised, who would you choose? In fact, you will now find many thousands of
Sorry, I was talking to myself, unmuted. What I was trying to say, what I thought I was saying was that when accused of being a perpetrator of genocide, it seems logical to me to say that if any successful genocide had taken place, there would be no one left to complain about genocide. I dislike this term simply because it's used by those who want to identify as victims of genocide. And it's unseemly, I think, for white people to talk about genocide and really using the tactics of victimhood that are used against white people. I find it particularly demeaning, and I really wish to point this out. It doesn't help if you as a man adopt feminine tactics of victimhood. It will do you no good. So don't do it. Don't complain about genocide in that helpless, moaning, undignified way. Because it doesn't give you dignity. It only helps with women and those beneath you saying how pathetic they are. But for the one supposedly in charge to complain about white genocide or whatever is, well, not a good tactic, I would suggest. And fundamentally, the problem is not about race. It's a red herring, as I keep saying. It's not. It's not about all the usual things that the current culture is seeking to divide us with, but really an attitude of mind, a failure of masculinity. So when you hear nationalists talk about white genocide, this is exaggerated, hysterical, unseemly, effeminate, and frankly disgusting. If you know you are weak, then resolve to be weak no longer. Diagnose the disease and propose its cure, and be seen to be able to do this honestly and rationally, in conformity to a set of moral principles. This is all that is required. But all I get are people whinging at me. Yesterday, when I was on Daniel's channel, the usual thing was said, that I am unhelpful, that what were his words? I forget now. That I'm non-contributing when I have the biggest and best idea that nobody can rival. The only reason why it's rejected is because you can't get over your hatred of Jews and Muslims. You hate the only idea that would save you, and you then refuse to talk about it and conspire with each other not to engage with me. Yesterday, in one of my streams, there is this just ridiculous idea. From this pagan white nationalist, he was polite, but the point is, it's so obvious to me that you're not going to rival Judaism with some religion that you think is special to you as white people that is pre-Christian. Any proposal to return to Western European gods before Christianity took over is doomed to failure. I'm just surprised you can't see it. It is astonishing, really. You think you can just cook up a religion? People who are marginalized, despised, you're going to cook up a religion and somehow the people above you are going to accept it and you're going to save yourselves using this religion. Really? You're going to... the scale of it is like a drop of water to an existing ocean. I just don't see how it can even be contemplated as a possible solution. You are faced with a cannon and you propose to make a spear to deal with your enemies. And now it seems that the culture, the government is going to divorce you from truth, logic, and morality and implement any crazy scheme it likes without consultation, and there will be no challenge from anyone. This is really the situation. And now I'm faced with the prospect of, well, I don't know, well, continuing to say what I want to say and, then the usual objections from, hopeless cases like Daniel to say, oh, I'm just in the process of creating a new religion for our people and that's going to defeat our enemies, but I reject Judaism, I reject the Abrahamic God, I reject Christianity, and Islam is not for Westerners. Well, actually, it's a universal religion. It's the most powerful idea available. There is nothing more powerful than Islam, really. And people like Daniel Sienkiewicz thinks he's going to have the intellectual and moral authority to cook up a religion, a moral system that will beat Judaism. And if he doesn't do it, he'll hate Jews even more and be even more circumspect in the way he discusses issues relating to Jews. It is almost unbelievably moronic. Now, why do I care? I care because, I don't know, you can't help caring when you think, but for this obviously incorrect perception, you would have solved your problems already, or not even had them. And I return to my analogy of the fox cub on the pizza box that I saw many years ago. And so it was this fox cub trying to get at the contents of the pizza box and being unable to because it was standing right on top of it. And perhaps a little self-control, the ability to pause and step back to assess the situation would have helped the fox cub. I suppose eventually it did. I should have stayed long enough to watch it do so. Or did it? Did it even give up and leave the pizza in the box after not being able to open it because it was standing on top of it. Now, there is this belief in Judaism that the cure exists before the disease. I like that. I like this piece of Jewish wisdom. Now, I know that it's probably baked into the DNA of white people to hate Jews after 2,000 years of Christianity. I certainly won't be able to deny the fact that but for Judaism, Christianity would not exist. So if you blame Christianity for your current humiliation and weakness and effeminacy, I suppose you could blame Judaism. But Christianity was not always so meek and mild. It only became meek and mild when Christians gave up the practice of burning heretics at the stake. So is this a practice you wish to return to in order to be muscular Christians? Is this really what you think will save you? I don't think Western man, however degenerate he is going to want to go back to the days of heretic burning. Besides, it would be distinctly un-American. So if Americans want to really throw out all their traditions, good and bad, and become this new woke nation, then there is no help for them. They will destroy themselves without the assistance of China. And China means to guide itself using truth, logic, and whatever system of morality they currently subscribe to. And think about this. Confucianism is still around, and Confucius lived and died 500 years before Jesus was born. And Confucianism doesn't even promise an afterlife. Because fundamentally, religion is about rules. It's not so much about narratives, although a nice story can make people who don't care about discussing these things a reason to believe. If they like the story, they're going to believe it. If they like the idea that there will be justice in the hereafter, then they will want to believe in the Abrahamic God. But the Abrahamic God means the laws of the Abrahamic God. And if we acknowledge the existence of God, then we have to follow his laws and accept the probability of being punished if we ignore them, as the Jews have been punished throughout the centuries for disobedience. So this frenzied hatred of Jews to say that they don't deserve to be God's chosen people is misplaced, I would argue. Under this system, Jews would be punished more severely than Gentiles for disobedience. If you read Deuteronomy 28, the curses from God for disobedience is pretty devastating. I recommend that you read them slowly. Judaism is it's its rules. They are very extreme to people who don't care for such things. And it is obviously to create the impression that Jews are required to adhere to far higher standards, and there's no escaping this. They are subject to harsher punishments, 36 capital offences, and much more stringent rules about speech, called Lashon Hara, evil speech. And it's more than not saying, not tale-bearing, not gossip-mongering, but really using discretion all the time, not even saying things that are true, not even saying things that the person concerned would say himself. It is all about discretion, diplomatic discretion, I suppose. So I have no problem about accepting the status of Jews simply because of these rules that they are supposedly subject to. They are clearly far higher standards, and as for them not following them, well, that's their problem. They're going to be punished in the hereafter or this life for not following them. And I don't think it is the place of Gentiles to emancipate Jews. But this was something that came with the French Revolution and would be irresistible to Jews, to being included as, full citizens of France, even though they had a different religion. But Napoleon got most of his ideas from Islam. It was Islam that guaranteed freedom of belief in the Quran, chapter 2, verse 256. And this was the basis of the First Amendment, as I keep saying. And it is a shame that the Americans refuse to acknowledge the Islamic roots of their constitution because of their hatred of Muslims and their refusal to admit that Islam is a superior religion to Christianity. And if they were thinking through the theology of it properly, this cannot be denied. Look at it this way. There are only two alleged revelations by the Abrahamic God, the Torah and the Quran. Whether you accept the veracity of the claim of Jews that the Torah came from God, and the veracity of the Muslim claim that the Quran came from God, the claim is nevertheless made. Christianity makes no such claim. It is the odd one out. It is the religion with the obviously inferior scripture. So why not admit this? It's not hard to admit. The evidence is not hard to find. Why would Gentiles listen to a heretical Jew and obey anything he says? 17 of the books of the New Testament were written by Paul, the heretical Jew, who instigated all these communities to practice idolatry and blasphemy. This is the reality of what Christians have been doing for 2,000 years. Let's have a look at the New Testament. So Christians have been, well, they should hate themselves, I suppose. I mean, I would hate myself if my ancestors have been subject to this absurd religion for so long. So the New Testament is famous for its 4 canonical Gospels. There are 14 Pauline epistles, basically his letters to all those people. To various, Paul's epistle to the Romans, Corinthians, his second epistle to the Corinthians, to the Galatians, Ephesians, the Philippians, the Colossians, the Thessalonians, and then to Timothy and Titus and Philemon. Paul, the heretical Jew. And if you were to ask Jews, rabbis, what they would do to Paul if they could, he would be sentenced to death for instigating communities to practice idolatry. This is the reality of Judaism as regards Christianity. But they don't want to talk about it because they don't want to upset Christians. 2,000 years of heresy and blasphemy. But then there have been 3 global Christian empires. What could God have been intending if he actually exists? Why would he allow these idolaters and blasphemers to prosper and acquire global empires? What could he have in mind? Well, I think if secular Quranism were acknowledged to be the solution to the rottenness of Western culture, then the solution would also be global. And this would be the happy outcome that I envisage and hope for. Let me continue to the end of the video for the sake of completeness.
Australians identifying as Aboriginal in the census, people who didn't identify as Aboriginal in the census before. And Claire Coleman's answer suggests why. A disgust with their white identity or with Western civilization, and of course a love of victimhood. And what we're seeing here, we're actually seeing in all the main English-speaking countries now, like the US in particular. And you ask yourself what China would conclude from all this, identity politics and poor me and all that. Well, you don't need to think about it, you just need to look. You look at what China's actually doing while we're obsessing about our gender pronouns and our racial identity and what gender we really are and what victims we are too. China's dictator, Xi Jinping, has cracked down right now on anyone he thinks is too individualist. It's a new cultural revolution. It's got film stars and pop stars and tycoons, even like Jack Ma. I mean, it's super rich. Anyone who seems too full of themselves, they've been taken out of circulation, some wiped off the internet. Meanwhile, Xi is promoting pride in China. And he says his big aim is to finally reunite the country, to take back Taiwan, which is an island democracy with about Australia's population. Xi has even threatened war to take it over. And almost every single day, again yesterday, has sent warplanes to test Taiwan's air defences. The tension is so high, in fact, that when China moved weapons on the coast last week, the Chinese internet went nuts with rumors that war was actually about to start. And America's top general last week said, well, no, he didn't actually think war would happen for a few months yet, maybe even 2 years. But after that, who knew?
Based on my analysis of China, I don't think that it is likely in the next near future being defined as 6, 12, maybe 24 months, that kind of window. Having said that, though, the Chinese are clearly and unambiguously building the capability to provide those options to the national leadership if they so choose at some point in the future. But near future, probably not, but anything can happen.
Now, China actually looks like it really does mean business, but it could actually afford to wait a little longer because the US keeps getting weaker, relatively speaking, while China keeps getting stronger. Indeed, the Pentagon now thinks China will have 5 times more nuclear weapons 10 years from now than the US first thought it would. And China's also testing a hypersonic missile that flies at 5 times the speed of sound and hits a target at a mile a second. And this is huge because a conventional ballistic missile, well, that flies in a predictable arc, high enough for radar to detect it a long way away and maybe you scramble some air defenses. But a hypersonic missile, that flies lower, much faster, and can weave around like an aircraft, making it incredibly hard to detect and even harder for Americans to stop. Now, China hasn't perfected this missile yet. Its last test missed its target by 30 kilometers. But it has built a target in the desert for more practice. The target happens to be in exactly the same shape as a US aircraft carrier. Now, all this is freaking Australia, of course. You've seen Morrison government, how it's hurriedly teamed up with the US and Britain to get more advanced weapons out here quick, not just the nuclear subs. Get them really fast, but it's all looking a little bit too late. And to be honest, I'm now wondering whether China has won already. Because seriously, is the US, are we going to go to war to defend Taiwan? And you look how strong China now is. Are we prepared to risk, losing Darwin in a missile strike? Will the US risk losing Los Angeles? Would we dare to risk war when the US is now running war games which show it actually lose against China every single time? And China knows this. In fact, the head of its most aggressive newspaper, the state-controlled Global Times, arrogant man, also went to America, I believe, he's now bragging that just to ask if America could win proves it probably can't.
30 years ago, people might not have asked these questions, but things have changed. In reality, the possibility that the US military has the strength to defeat the People's Liberation Army in the Taiwan streets is becoming less and less. The US's willingness to devote massive amounts of people and resources in a fight to the death in the Taiwan streets is increasingly losing the support of confidence in an eventual victory.
But what does it matter if China invades Taiwan now or in 10 years? Ask Wang Huning, this great thinker who's got the ear of the dictator. Now, of course, it's not all hopeless. China is communist, and communist economies aren't usually as strong as they look from outside. And China's is in a bit of trouble. It could yet collapse. But in the West, our pride in what we have and our willingness to defend it, that seems to be collapsing already. And shouldn't we do something about that?
Shouldn't we do something about that? Well, I've told you the problem. There is no functioning moral system in the West. And when I say that, I am always ignored because it seems that the people I talk to don't know what a moral system is or don't care to discuss it because they don't want to acknowledge that Christianity is kaput. Because I guess they know that if they acknowledge that Christianity is kaput, they would have to replace it with Islam. That's why nobody will talk to me. Isn't that the real reason? And so the problem will continue to be ignored. How long do you think anyone, any individual, let alone a nation, an empire, or a civilization, can do without connecting at some point with truth, logic, and morality? How much longer? Aren't I right when I say that in a matriarchy, nothing is fit for purpose? I know I'm right, but I also acknowledge that being right doesn't get you listened to. There are plenty of failed prophets in the Bible. The ones who were ignored, executed, tortured, imprisoned, abused. There's always the desire to shoot the messenger bearing bad news. And the horror of it is that there is no one prepared to discuss any of these things with me. No one of sufficient intellectual stature, either in the anti-establishment should I say organizations? There is no organization, is there? UKIP is no more. There is no political party that could be said to represent dissidents. That is why they think, that is why the political establishment think they can do as they like. That is what gives them the confidence to, well, as it were, throw stones at a caged animal to provoke it, just for their amusement. That is what they are doing to us, and that is what you allow them to do to us if you refuse to discuss ideas. Talking about discussing ideas, I was recently on, well, not on the Thomas Barton Rees stream because I was only in the chat, and I'm sure he's hidden me now. Simon Roberts was there. He's one of those, I don't know, should we call him intellectually respectable? Well, he doesn't propose anything, does he? He only talks about his connections with the Delingpole brothers, who also propose nothing. And he seems to be a proponent of Ralph's NRX, and Ralph isn't talking to me anymore because Ralph is too busy pandering to his Christian supporters and to Jews who have no particular agenda other than to prevent the criticism of Jews. So faced with all these obstructions, what should I do? There's literally no one for me to talk to, is there? No one even prepared to say, secular Quranism would wouldn't work in theory because they wouldn't even understand the what am I trying to say? They wouldn't understand the point of discussing these ideas. There will be people who will forever be talking about the different people, the different groups that they hate, and focus forever on their individual grievance. Could it be that I am the only intellectual in the entire nationalist community? I know in theory there are people like Greg Johnson. He seems to have gone quiet, hasn't he? Richard Spencer. What does he do? He contradicts himself and then he apologizes, and his apologies are not accepted. I think they are going to financially ruin him with vexatious litigation. Ed Dutton, with his ridiculous ideas, refuses to platform me. What do they fear? If they're so clever, they can send me packing with a few well-aimed words. Let's have a look at the chat and see all the cogent arguments that you have produced to what I have said so far. Colin wants to dismiss everything Andrew Belt says. I have some idea of him being, he's a neocon, right? And I think even the political establishment will be at odds with each other over tactics and whatever. So I don't have to agree with Andrew Belt on everything to decide what he says at one time in a short video approvingly. It doesn't matter about, look, a broken clock will tell the time correctly twice a day. I think it's pathetic the way Colin tries to pretend to be more Chinese than I am. I don't know. What are you trying to do? I mean, what would be the point of me going to Australia and being more Australian than you? It's just a completely irrelevant preoccupation of yours. Yeah, I do mean what I say. Domingo, no one of sufficient intellectual stature. Can you think of anyone? Can you think of anyone? You can't. I'm not a boastful woman. I really think I'm not. I try to rein it in. I don't intentionally boast, but sometimes you have to blow your own trumpet, haven't you? Because no one else will do it for you. When you have to put your cards on the table and say, look, you better go with me because you haven't got anyone better. Christine Ramsey says something interesting for a change. Claire's morality is punishment and status, a Sino obsession of losing face. But it's not a Sino obsession, is it? It's not exclusively a Sino obsession. Of course, punishment is necessary to make people do things, and of course, status is the only way to order your society. And The status awarded has to be commensurate with merit, and merit has to be, well, universally acknowledged. What's your problem with that, Christine Ramsey? Losing face. Well, losing face just means being lowered in status. It's not just a Chinese thing. After all, pride is considered a deadly sin. What are you all guilty of but your pride, anger, and envy at the greater, the higher status of Jews and Muslims in your country? They get treated better because they have protected characteristics that your own government has conferred on them to your exclusion. How has it come to this? Because you've taken your eye off the ball of marriage and family values. And now you refuse to admit that that is a problem and double down on your efforts to blame Jews and Muslims. You're complaining about Ralph. He doesn't have a consistent message, does he? He just panders to whoever. He's got himself a formula for attracting, viewers. And that's probably enough for him. I attract so many viewers. I don't have to say anything consistent. I have a following. As long as I repeat, as long as I discuss, certain topics, and I can take inconsistent positions on each topic, it doesn't matter because people don't really care. They just want to hear all these subjects discussed so they can commune with each other in the chat. I'm not about that, am I? Attracting viewers is definitely not in Claire's wheelhouse. I'm not quite sure what a wheelhouse is, but I take a position of principle. I'm not going to change my tune just to get a few more subscribers, particularly if they consist of low intelligence, low education, low status people. I'm really not interested in pandering to them, and I think this is pretty clear. I'm pretty certain that my ideas are already known, and the problem is that nobody wants to discuss them. So what will happen, I think, what I believe and hope will happen is somebody will get the idea that it is time to stop this ridiculous conspiracy to not engage with me. And then the floodgates will open. So to sum up what I thought I said, I always try to do that because I know I have a tendency to wander off the subject a bit, is that the rot in Western culture is matriarchy, making the West dangerously weak, to the extent that before it thinks China destroys it, it will destroy itself anyway in all kinds of ridiculous ways, such as its dysgenic social policies, its high tax environmental policies that will cripple businesses, its causing of mental health issues in so many people. Because when people believe that they have no hope, if they believe that they are just chickens in a cage, waiting for slaughter, they will behave accordingly, I think. If they believe that there is no hope, they will behave in a nihilistic way. And this is what Andrew Bolt was talking about when he mentioned the book of this Chinese intellectual who hasn't run a major province, which is the usual qualification of being in the Politburo, because he's this great intellectual. Perhaps he will be known as the Confucius of his time. Confucius was a political strategist or political scientist. He began the tradition of advising rulers. I know in every age there's a vacancy for such people. I think the Greeks have prophets coming to their city-states to tell them how better to run their city-states. Well, I get the impression that perhaps I'm not quite right about this. I know in the West we have think tanks, but they don't really think very clearly. There are too many of them. A lot of their activity is pointless since nobody listens to them, because sooner or later they become clear in their bias towards a certain kind of thinking. I'm saying it must all be swept aside because you just have to choose the best ideology, and I'm saying I believe I have it. I have it because nobody can defeat me, which is why I'm faced with this ridiculous conspiracy not to engage with me. So really, I have won all my arguments. And that's why the objections to my arguments are so very pathetic in the chat.